After about 10 years in emergency medicine, you stop noticing the diagnoses and you start paying a bit more attention to the people, the patients. And one of the strangest things that you pick up on along the way is that the age on the computer screen and the age on the trolley are often two completely different things. I have looked after 60-year-olds who felt 80. They have been worn down and they are frail and they have just become old before their time. They are breathless, crossing the room, struggling to get up out of the chair. I've also looked after people well into their 80s who felt decades younger than the computer screens said they should. They are sharp, they are upright, and full of plans and social activities in their diary. So you can have two people who are roughly the same age, but depending on how they've lived, they can have completely different health trajectories. Now, the question that started to nag at me shift after shift after shift in the hospital was a simple one. What were the younger feeling people actually doing differently? Over the years, I have absolutely watched for this. I have asked about this. I ask every patient about their lifestyle, what they eat, what do they do during the week, how they move, do they exercise, all of these different things. I've been asking this for years. And a lot of it comes down to just 4 habits, 4 ways of moving through the world and not a single supplement or diet among them. And I'm going to be honest with you, number 4 surprises most people, and it's one that I now think matters more than all of the others put together. A quick hello if you're new here. My name's Dr. Alex. I'm an NHS doctor, and this channel exists for one reason: to help you prevent the diseases that I see in the A&E instead of waiting for them to already have happened before we do something about it. Modern life is very good at making you ill very slowly, and modern medicine mostly waits until something has happened. We practice reactive medicine in the Western world. And so if this video is useful to you, then please help me out by liking the video, giving it a hype as well, and subscribing. All of those are completely free, and it means so much to me. Now, before anybody mentions it in the comments, obviously, what I'm describing here, well, these are just my own observations. This isn't a randomized controlled trial. This is what I've noticed over a career. And what I notice on shift isn't the same as a proper research study. My observations are shaped by who happens to come through the door on that particular night that I'm working, which is a very skewed sample, I admit. And I could be picking up on patterns that are partly in my own head. Let's just share it anyway. There is real science behind each of these 4, and I'm going to point to it as we go through. So treat this as, just a doctor sharing what a decade of watching people up close has taught him, backed up where I can back it up, not as hard proof of anything. With that said, let's carry on with those 4 important things. The first one is that these people tend to stay curious, and it often shows up around food. Have you ever noticed that the people who seem to stay young are almost always still learning something? I'm talking about like a restless sort of curiosity, and more often than not, it really does point at what they eat. They like cooking. They want to try new recipes. They grow vegetables in their garden. They understand what a particular food is actually doing inside them. They watch YouTube videos like this because they want to learn more. All of you I'm including in this first one. These are the ones that stop me on shift to ask what I think about fermented foods, or whether they should worry about, the dose of statin that they're on, or whether they should be worrying about their HbA1c. They are, inquisitive about their own blood tests. And that interest turns out to be protective in a real practical, almost sneaky way. Because a curious cook eats real and varied and whole foods almost by accident, simply because they enjoy the process of making it. So the good diet, the healthy diet, arrives as a byproduct of the hobby rather than as a chore that they've got to force themselves to do. But the curiosity also feeds the brain directly as well. And here, the science is absolutely solid. I've mentioned this a few times in other videos. Your brain runs on a principle that we call neuroplasticity, which just means it's constantly rewiring itself in response to what you ask of it. If you learn a difficult new skill at the age of 60, like learning to cook, for example, then you're going to physically strengthen and grow the connections between your brain cells. And this is what we call cognitive reserve. It's almost like a kind of buffer that helps the brain keep working well even as it ages. A mind that keeps learning, keeps asking, keeps taking on things that are hard, that brain holds onto its connections far better than a brain that switched off years ago in somebody who retired and never filled that time with anything and just spends all day in front of the TV. So learning new things is so good for you in so many ways. Why don't you pick something this week that you can focus on? It could be a musical instrument. Why not? Why not learn to play the guitar in your 60s or 70s? Why not? It sounds a bit daft, but I'll say again, why not? Why don't you start learning a new language? Why don't you start learning a bit of Italian and then book a trip to Italy next year with your friend? The possibilities are literally endless. So let's move on to number 2 then. This one is a bit more difficult, and it's one that I struggle with sometimes as well. The people who stay well, they have a knack of taking a setback, feeling it completely fully, but then moving forward, getting past that setback rather than ruminating or stewing on it for weeks and months. So I overthink things. My wife will tell you that I overthink things. Things get to me a bit more than they should. They rattle around my head at night when I'm trying to sleep sometimes. And I say all of this with real respect for how hard it truly is. Because telling somebody to simply not let things bother them is obviously useless advice that helps nobody. Let me give you a recent example from my own life. So I had my first ever migraine a couple of weeks ago at the gym of all places. And this is after diagnosing countless migraines in other people over the years without ever really having had one myself. It started with, just squiggly lines in my vision in my right eye to the point where I couldn't really read anything properly. I remember sort of rubbing my eyes thinking, wow, I'm really struggling to read, but it was only in my right eye. And then around 15 minutes later, this gradual headache started on one side, and I started to feel a bit dizzy and a bit sick as well. And it lasted a few hours before slowly easing off. Now, to me, that is a textbook migraine. And I even had a clear trigger because I had been a bit stressed at the time and not sleeping well, thanks to our boy George, who was going through yet another sleep regression. And yet, even as a doctor who knew exactly what this was, I still lay awake, a few nights after this had eased, and that migraine never came back. It was just a one-off thing. I still worried about it at night, and that made the whole thing just feel even worse. It is just human nature, I guess. But the people who can meet a thing like that, they can have a setback or have something happen to them, they can deal with it and then let it go, they seem to be protected in a way, I guess, that the rest of us who don't deal with things well aren't protected. And there is a physical side to this as well, not only a mental one, and it's worth understanding why. So when you're stressed or really worried about something, your body pumps out a hormone called cortisol. And cortisol is brilliant in short bursts. It is the thing that sharpens you to deal with a real threat, and then it switches off again. The trouble is that it was never designed to run continuously month after month, year after year. And when chronic stress keeps it switched on, it does very slow but quiet damage. It keeps your blood pressure raised. It disturbs the deep stages of your sleep. It literally pushes your blood sugar up over time, and it stokes a low background level of inflammation that gradually wears down your arteries and your brain and pretty much every system that you depend on. So the people who can process a bad day or some bad news or, whatever, anything that is a bit of a setback to them, and then really deal with it and then let it go without ruminating over it, without ever thinking about it in these terms. These are the people who are protecting the heart and their mind from years of corrosion. So if this is you, if you can resonate with what I'm saying here, then the thing that helps me most when I have a bit of a setback isn't trying to think my way out of it. It isn't trying to think calm thoughts. It is moving my body. It is getting out into the fresh air, getting my walking boots on or my running shoes and just going for a run. Or most importantly, talking it out with somebody. And for me, that is obviously Steph, and basically offloading the worries onto somebody else or sharing it with somebody, which will really help you in turn as well. And in fact, with that migraine, I didn't really mention it at the time, but once I did talk about it with Steph, who's also a doctor, I felt completely fine about it. It hasn't come back since, and I no longer worry about it. So, for most things, a problem shared really is a problem halved. Okay, moving on to the third habit, and let me ask you a question at this point. When you hear a bold, confident health claim, some big marketing around a supplement or something like that, can you actually process that and ask questions, or does the confidence around the marketing just sort of sweep you along? Because the third habit here is the ability to reason, to have a proper conversation about health and weigh up how good the evidence actually is and hold your own view loosely enough to change it when something better comes along. That is really protective as you get older. There is, an absolute ocean of noise out there. And every single week, there is a new miracle food and a new villain as well. A new supplement that will fix everything and a new thing that you must never eat again. The people who stay well, in my opinion anyway, these are the ones who can hear a dramatic claim like this and instinctively ask a few questions. Like, who is actually saying this and what do they get if I believe them or buy this thing? Is this backed by a proper trial, or is it just one person's gut feeling dressed up in scientific language? Does the size of the claim match the size of the evidence? So a good example of that would be just this tiny capsule that I bought from this doctor online. Would this really help to reduce heart attacks and strokes, these hugely complicated diseases? Or is it a bit too good to be true? And what happens if I'm wrong? These are all really about being curious and a little skeptical, reading around a subject, rather than taking a single headline at face value. And it's exactly why I put loads of research links in the description of every video that I make, so you can go and explore what I'm saying for yourself and reach your own conclusions. Every doctor and every professional, me included, should be open to that kind of scrutiny, because that is how all of us get sharper and learn more over time. That habit of thinking, gives you a better chance of staying away from the gimmicks, off the extreme diets that wreck people's relationship with food. And, they point you instead towards the boring and unglamorous foundations that actually work over decades that I talk about all the time. Good thinking, it turns out, really is a longevity habit in its own right, because, it stops you burning your money. It stops you chasing things that were never going to help in the first place. So next time you hear or read some big, bold, confident health claim, which is mostly supplements I'm talking about here, the real question is whether you can pause and sort of gently poke at it, or whether the sheer confidence of this marketing carries you off before you've had a chance to actually think about it. If you've had a painful knee for many years, is it really going to be this supplement that you've been lacking that is going to be the answer to everything around that knee? Or could it be the fact that you've not been exercising or lifting weights to try and soften the force around that joint, and eating inflammatory foods that feed this low-grade inflammation, all of which is contributing to that? Which one makes more sense? And here's the fourth one, and this is the one that most people aren't really expecting. And it doesn't have anything to do with cleverness or willpower or, diet at all. The people who stay young almost always have a reason to stay young, something outside themselves that needs them, that depends on them, that pulls at them, gives them purpose and gives their day a point, like grandchildren that they want to get down on the floor and play with and then stand back up without help, or a partner that they are caring for, or an elderly parent, a garden or an allotment, or their choir group, or their exercise class that they lead every week or so, a bit of work that they are not finished with, like a painting, or a cause that they absolutely believe in, like their religion. Or it could be a dog that has to be walked, whatever the weather, whether it's wet or cold or windy. And I say that as somebody who has a golden Labrador called Mango, and he gets walked 3 times a day, whatever the weather. Now, purpose, it really does sound a bit soft and unscientific, like something that belongs on a fridge magnet rather than in a medical journal. But the research on purpose and this sense of, I guess, people needing you and living for something, the research is surprisingly strong. In large studies following thousands of older adults, the people with a clear sense of purpose in life had lower rates of heart disease. They held on to their memory and thinking better as they aged. They lived longer, and those links held up even after accounting for the obvious things like existing illness or how active they already were. And when you sit with it, it really does make complete sense, because a reason to get up in the morning is a reason to keep moving, to keep eating well, to keep turning up and keep showing up for your own body. It is the habit